how is everyone on vacation? There's just this feeling of the math is not mathing when you go on social media, and then you throw into it influencer culture and brand marketing, and all of those things are jumbled up on your feed. It's like human beings were not meant to be exposed to other people's lifestyles this way.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan DeBaun, a passionate entrepreneur and life advisor. With the Journey podcast, you'll discover that success isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. I'm sharing stories of amazing people who've taken control of their lives. Join me on my own journey to discover the secret sauce behind reaching success with permission from no one else. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Journey podcast. Today's episode I'm really excited about. We're going to get into entrepreneurship, making the leap from being a full-time person with a 9-to-5 and a direct deposit that comes every 2 weeks, regardless of how much effort you put in, and being an entrepreneur and all of the things that go into making that leap financially. We're also going to get into how to redefine your own relationship and identity with yourself and what your expectations of self are as you grow in your career, whether you are an entrepreneur or a professional, and kind of breaking through the mold of what's expected of you versus what you actually want to do with your life. I'm joined today by Chelsea Fagan. I'm so excited for her to be here. If you don't know Chelsea, I don't know where you've been, because she has an incredible business that talks all about personal finance, mostly for women, but also her own journey on her own social channels, where she's done everything from, writing a romance novel, which is incredible. I'm so excited to read it. She has a new book coming out on hosting and another book coming out from the company, I believe. And so we're going to talk a little bit about her journey. So Chelsea, welcome to the podcast and to the show.
Hi, Morgan. Thank you for having me.
So for people who aren't as familiar with the financial diet, just give us an overview of what your company does and how you help people.
Yeah, so pretty standard media company, which obviously I'm sure you're familiar with. We do video, newsletter, social media events, classes, books, all primarily around financial education. Our audience is about 90% women, so, pretty exclusively toward young adult women. In addition to the more straight up financial education, like we'll have, investing classes and things like that. We also do, like my flagship YouTube series once a month is more sort of economic and cultural commentary, because essentially the goal is to obviously help people get good with their money, but then also help people just sort of be a little bit more interested in money as a concept.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How did you get started with the financial diet?
I started it as a personal blog to hold myself accountable because I had an extremely unhealthy relationship with money.
Yeah. I read that you were in probably at the time what felt like a lot of debt, comparatively though, not anywhere near what the kind of debt that people are coming out of college with at this point in the game. How did you start to decide okay, I want to take action to push outside of kind of your day-to-day norm?
Well, the number was smaller. I think between all of my different liabilities, it was still a little under 10,000 maybe, but a lot of that was credit card debt, which is very different from student debt in the sense that, the interest rates are terrible. And, although, listen, we could talk for a long time on people wasting money on degrees. I know several people who started law school and never finished. So you can definitely throw money away in academia, but theoretically, if you're going into debt for something like a degree, you're doing so as an investment. Whereas, my credit card debt was primarily just from going to the mall and buying stuff I didn't need. And so, initially it was back in 2012 when I got my first book deal, my debt was in collections. I'm going to pay it off. I'm going to sort of get to zero. But by the time I started TFD, I had a salaried job for, multiple years. It wasn't a lot of money. I was paid, I think at the time, $36,000 a year, which in New York City is not really a livable wage, even at the time. But I was in a dual income household. My husband and I we still don't have children. My then boyfriend and I didn't have children. We didn't have it was a 1-bedroom apartment. We didn't have a lot of fixed costs. So, it was very clear to me that I had just been so used to being in total financial chaos that being just okay felt good enough, just surviving. I had no savings, for example. I had no retirement account, and I wanted to start making progress on things beyond just not drowning.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a sentiment that a lot of people can resonate with, especially because it feels really hard right now in today's economy and everything feels expensive. I think you guys just did a video about that. We're doing landscaping in our backyard, and it's the weirdest thing because you get bids for everything. You get bids for the grass, you get bids for the gravel, someone leveling the land, someone planting the things, picking up the mulch, etc. And the price ranges from everything. You get someone to quote $300 and the next person's going to quote $800 for the exact same materials and the exact same labor. So it feels like the prices of everything are just changing so much. And in my own business, I also feel the same way when we're talking to candidates and doing job interviews and people are saying, we say, here's our expected salary. And then they say, well, here's their expected salary. I can get someone with the exact same set of skills and the exact same experience. And I get wild differences in the amount of money that people want to make or expected to make. What do you make of that? I mean, you have so much access to information and data and feedback on what's happening. What are your thoughts on what's actually going on?
In terms of kind of the economics of it or kind of the emotions of it?
Oh, the emotions for sure.
I think we're 1 year apart. I think you're 1 year younger than me, but we kind of grew up in, we were very much put out into the world, our generation as young adults, into the recession.
Yes.
And into an economy that just was not anything like what we thought it was going to be or what our parents experienced. I don't have a college degree. I did go to a community college and I don't regret that. I'm in some ways grateful for it because I don't have the debt that comes with it. But it was only because I had really bad grades coming out of high school. If, I had the ability to have gone to a 4-year school and had the quote unquote college experience and do all those exciting things, I would have given anything to do it. And so many people, I think, that I grew up with who did get good grades, who made all the right decisions, who went to a good college, went to the best college that they could get accepted by, even if it was very expensive. There was just a very clear narrative about what it means to be good and the decisions that you need to make to guarantee a comfortable life on the other side of it, or at least a life that you can do the basics on, things like home ownership, maybe starting a family, putting money in savings. And I think emotionally, what is really different, the video I think you're referring to is we called it Why Everyone Feels Insane Right Now, because I think for a lot of people, there is kind of a grief and an anger at how unlike what they expected the adult experience to be, the reality actually is. And I think people, to your point, people are making all different amounts for all different things. And I think there's also a huge lack of transparency. Even in my own industry, I talk all the time. I'm in masterminds, with other women who are in media. I'm sure you are as well. And, the lack of transparency is also keeping it so that you could be working right next to someone and not know that they're making 2 to 3 times as much or vice versa. And that also, I think, we've done a really good job at keeping people afraid and ashamed of talking about money, which ultimately only, kind of furthers the dissonance between what we expected life to be and what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. What I hear you saying is that one, this generation, and I think the generation coming up behind us, we are not living in the same economic situation that our parents and our grandparents were put in. My parents had a great house, 3-4 bedroom house in the suburbs of St. Louis. We lived in a cul-de-sac. My mom didn't work. My dad worked 2 jobs so that she didn't work. She stayed home with the kids. We went to Goodwill. My mom made all my costumes. I remember us clipping coupons when I was in elementary school, middle school. But at some point they got out of that. Now they live here and everything is fine. That people were able to move out of their situation through hard work and saving and investing and doing all the things like you mentioned. Now it feels like you have to win the lottery to move out of your grounding of wherever you came from. And I think that's the reason why people were so excited about crypto and NFTs and stuff, because it was this opportunity for people to actually maybe leap out of whatever situation they were in. Obviously, we saw how that worked out for everybody, but I think one of the things I really love about the content that your company puts out is that it makes things really practical. And it also, in some ways, I think you guys have pushed redefining people's relationship with experiences, with things, with items, with capitalism. And so that people perhaps can change their mindset around stuff. Can you talk about where that stemmed from? Did that come from your own experience and why that's kind of what it seems to be as a consumer, a core value of the content that you guys put out?
Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, I grew up low income. My family did not have hardly anything growing up, especially when I was young. We lived in the South. We lived in a very low income community. It was just the kind of thing where I didn't really want for that much because just no one around me had a lot.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't normal to have a lot. But then in middle school, we moved to a very affluent community where we were, much lower income than most of the people around us. And being exposed to, people people at my high school would get BMWs and Mercedes for their 16th birthday. I worked at a yacht club and I nannied for very high income families. Like being exposed to that level of affluence and consumerism, in many ways, even though my family was better off by the time we lived there, I actually felt poorer because it was just the comparison factor with the people around me. And to your point about, the content we create, in some ways, I feel like with social media, because when I was in that experience, that was really before social media or just at the beginning of it. And now when you look at social media, it's kind of like everyone has the experience that I had, right? Which is like living whatever life you happen to be living, but in very close exposure and proximity to people who are living radically different lifestyles. And even, people in your own lives, we're working on a video essay for June called like, how is everyone on vacation? Like, because there's just this feeling of like the math is not mathing when you go on social media and then you throw into it, influencer culture and brand marketing and all of those things are jumbled up on your feed. It's like human beings were not meant to be exposed to other people's lifestyles this way. And I know from my own personal experience growing up, I am 100% sure that I got into severe credit card debt, at least severe for me, because I was so exposed to these things that I couldn't afford on a day-to-day basis. And when you look at the numbers of a lot of these younger people, especially Gen Z and even now Gen Alpha, like they're now getting used to the idea of everything being on credit, Klarna, Afterpay, these programs that just make it so that you see something and if you want it, it doesn't even have to be remotely related to your financial ability to pay for it. And so for us, it's not to say we don't still buy things, enjoy things, spend our money. It's to say like we have to separate out the sort of mental manipulation that's happening every time you open your computer or your phone or the TV from what you actually want and what actually is giving you value and joy. Because a lot of those people that you're seeing, some of them do have money and, God bless them, but a lot of them don't. And a lot of that is debt and smoke and mirrors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I want to shift a little bit into entrepreneurs because I actually think that happens a lot in entrepreneurship and in business as well. What I see happening is people who have 9-to-5s have this pressure or feel devalued because there's a glamorization of working for yourself. And, I can work from anywhere. I can do whatever I want. I'm my own boss, be your own boss, and that's part of our culture. But what I see behind closed doors is a lot of entrepreneurs who maybe have even raised venture funding, particularly in this environment, calling me saying, Morgan, I need to raise more money. And I'm like, okay, you need to raise money. You need to raise another round. Like, let's talk about it. What are your numbers? And they tell me their numbers. I'm like, you can't raise with these numbers. You're not going to be able to go out into the market and get any money because your revenue in 2020 and 2021 is higher than your revenue today. And certainly it would be a crazy down round for you. And you've already raised too much money for your business, frankly. So if you want to raise more money, you're going to wind up in a down round, which means that you're going to wind up selling for your equity at a lower price than what it was previously. And when you're a founder, it means that you own less of your company every single time you raise. So at some point, you become an employee of your own company. So what are we really working for here? And when I explain that to people, the grief that they have to go through of I'm working every day for somebody else now when I thought that I was working as an entrepreneur for my freedom to be free. And it's kind of heartbreaking because I think that I don't know who the they is, but they told us a lie, right? That being an entrepreneur is freedom. And I actually think that it is more restrictive oftentimes. And I'm curious, in your communities, I know you guys have an incredible private community and membership. How have you advised solopreneurs who are potentially going through this? And, one fact that I was just looking at before our call today was like, I think it's 90% of Black-owned businesses are solopreneurs. And I think it's like 85% or maybe even a little higher than that of women-owned businesses are solopreneurs. So we're really talking the majority of small business owners are teams of one, right? So if their revenue goes up and down, the first thing that's going to take a hit is most likely their personal income.
100%. This is something that's been on my mind a lot over the past couple of years because this is our 10th year in business. And, I think a lot of what you're describing with the grief and the frustration, and I totally agree that I think being an entrepreneur is more restrictive than being an employee in a lot of ways, especially once you start to have a staff. I love my staff. Most of our staff has been with us for years and years, and they're wonderful, and I wouldn't trade them for the world. But just the management management aspect, the financial aspect, the administrative aspect. It can be incredibly overwhelming and stressful as a business owner. Last year, I was very transparent with my community. I didn't pay myself for a part of last year because we had, some issues with some of our partners. And the fact that 10 years into a business, that can still very much happen. And it's been, especially since the pandemic, a huge part of our business has always been events. And pretty much since the pandemic, it's been every year is like a big question mark as to what it's going to look like. And I think something that I really came to at the end of last year, and I'm still kind of going through on a personal level, because a lot of what you're describing, like there are really two things in any work, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, one is the actual work and one is the identity and sort of the self-image and the self-mythologizing that comes with being an entrepreneur. I think especially for people for whom that was important, or that they've been doing it a long time, or that, maybe they achieved some great success financially, professionally, in terms of their visibility, whatever it may be, that the work, the title, the concept of being an entrepreneur becomes so foundational to your sense of self and to your sense of self-worth that it almost clouds your ability to even see what you're really doing anymore, what is worth it, what is making you happy, what you're good at. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs in my space in personal finance. I'm in a few mastermind groups, and I've had a few women that I've known in the space for the decade that I've been in it who are getting out and going back to 9 to 5s. And they're going through basically grief counseling because the space has changed. Interest rates have changed. A lot of things have changed. And in the financial services company, a lot has shifted in the past few years, and we're lucky to be here. But I think the most important thing for entrepreneurs, especially when it comes to dealing with these difficult situations that you're talking about, and especially if you're alone, is to remember that the entire point of doing it in the first place is to do something that you actually enjoy. And you can go a really, really long time no longer doing something you enjoy just because you want to be able to say that you succeeded or that you're an entrepreneur. And the ones that I know who have made the switch back to their 9 to 5 and are now continuing on their work as a side job and as, their income for other financial goals, pretty much without exception, they're a lot happier, I can say. So all of that is to say, that's not to say everyone needs to, always be on the verge of quitting. It's just the sunk cost fallacy and the identity-based decision-making can keep you in a really bad pattern for a really long time.
I completely agree with you, Chelsea. One of the things that I admire about you, and I think that is helpful for people to see, is like separating your identity from your job. Something I talk about a lot is when I first started Blavity, I started it when I was in San Francisco, and you could walk down the street and say, "Hey, Blavity," and I would like turn around because like the company was like my identity, like so ingrained. And that was Silicon Valley culture in a lot of ways. You wear the t-shirts, like everybody had a company. It was like a thing, it was part of the social circle. But it took a lot of like working and unwinding my brain to say, you are not a company, you're a person. And it's okay for you to do other things. Like it's okay for you to have a podcast that's not owned by Blavity. It's okay for you to have an Instagram account that shows your full life. That's not just startup information where you're just pushing out corporate marketing for your company. It's okay for you to have hobbies and paint and not spend the weekends working. It's been a journey that I've been on. Blavity's also 10 years this summer. Yay. Go us, a decade in the trenches.
I mean, truly, it's no small feat.
No small feat at all. But I also I'm proud of the work that we've done. I'm also equally as proud of myself for the evolution that I've gone through to be able to decouple the company from my identity. And I'm curious, how have you been able to do it? And like, what would you recommend to other people who are seeking that level of freedom?
It's interesting. It was also kind of a big thing last year for me. So I have 2 other partners who own the company with me. I do own the majority of the company, but I have 2 other women, both of whom have had children in the past few years. I don't want children personally, and I am very happy with that decision. But it also did kind of occur to me that, and it's a mixed bag for sure, right? Like we definitely, I think, place too much pressure on women to make motherhood their primary identity and to take on too much of the work and too much of the time and all of that. So I'm not saying it's always necessarily a good thing, but one thing that motherhood does for, someone professionally, especially an entrepreneur, is it forces you to diversify your identity. It forces you to diversify your time. In the case of my partners, one of them is currently on maternity leave. We have the actual maternity leave, but then, one of them wanted to downshift and only work a small amount. One of them is like, I want to work part-time. There's just a natural sort of distancing with your professional life and identity, and also just that enforced time off. Now, again, that's a privilege. Not everyone has maternity leave.
Totally.
But in the case of me, who didn't have that and who didn't have any sort of thing happening that would put that line in the sand, I kind of realized like I could just end up never really taking a substantial time off or kind of doing any other big project. I've always had a lot of hobbies and I do like hobbies, but I took on my project with my romance novel last year in part because it had been a very long time that I hadn't really done anything for just the creative enjoyment and fulfillment. And I sort of wanted to give myself permission to, have a lot of fun with it, make it a really in-depth experience, work with artists and creatives that I really enjoy. And in part because I think diversifying your identity is something that we don't tell people to do enough. And it's so important in part because, yes, I think it's good for mental health and creativity and all of those things. It can even be good for helping diversify your income. But I think maybe most importantly is that it relieves the pressure on any one aspect of what you do. For example, I used to be, prior to really pushing myself to do other projects and have other things going, quite frankly, really jealous and over concerned with like what was happening with like my competitors in the industry. I would be like, oh, who got that RFP and I didn't? I would look at like, oh, who made this list or was on the cover of that magazine, or like, and like, God forbid someone, I'm like, that person's a scam artist. Why are they getting jobs? Like,
oh my gosh, I could do this exact same dance with you because it drives me nuts. It's a terrible thing. We got to let it go.
Yes, we do. But I realized after I did that, I was like, part of it was because everything was so wrapped up in this one thing that I did.
Yep.
And the more you break yourself up a little bit and break your time and energy up, the less fixated you are on any one part of how you're doing in one area.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? It's like if you're over indexing and all your mental energy is in one basket, then everything feels ridiculous when you're like, well, why is this person getting this recognition when we're better? Or like, how did this happen? And we didn't get it, or we lost this deal. I think to your point, when your basket is full of so many things, it gives you the mental freedom to say, honestly, I don't give a shit today. It's fine. Let me just continue with like my work, and let me continue with my life. I think the other thing about having children that I've realized, I just had a baby, he's 6 months old. So not just, but it feels like yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I talk a lot on the podcast about how I was like, could do it, could not do it, could go either way. And how I would say like 50% of my close friends are not having children by choice. And so I'm surrounded by a lot of people who have that sense of like decision-making power and freedom for themselves. And one of the things that I've seen so much, which I wish we would give just people, is this permissioning that happens in culture when you say, I just had a baby, or, I'm pregnant. It shifts the permissions in relationship with people. Like I was in Pilates yesterday. I couldn't do half the exercise. I said, oh, I just had a baby. And the instructor immediately was like, oh, okay. How are your hips? And she started giving me, more like tips and adjustments and modification. I'm like, yeah, help me. No, I probably couldn't do those exercises before I had the baby, but who knows, And I think that part of that is how can we give people the permission to just be who they are, or have more grace regardless of their status as a parent or not a parent, And also, how can people claim that level of freedom for themselves as they are moving through the world where, you feel comfortable saying, I can't do that. Is there a modification, without having to say, because I had a baby, right? I mean, I'm even working on this for myself, right? I'm wondering how you were able to set those boundaries, or like redefine and renegotiate your time with yourself first, to be able to create space for this abundance of, being an author, which is not a trivial amount of work. I mean, fiction is like crazy. I'm working on my nonfiction book, which is, I think, actually easier than fiction because, you're like making up stuff, So it's like really the definition of being a creative. Have you been able to do this for yourself?
Well, thank you. I mean, I totally agree. Fiction's more difficult just in the process of creating it. Although it is, it is really fun, especially because a lot of the books that we've done have been more like financial in nature. So it's like you got to make sure to fact check and
Yeah.
like all that kind of stuff. So there's pressure in a different way. But yeah, I mean, on the one hand, so I've been publishing books since 2012, and I have 2 books coming out next year. So I write quite a lot. I also, for TFD, like for example, working on the scripts for our monthly videos where I have my newsletter, like I write a lot, and I always have, that's always been my profession, is writing. So I do write very quickly. I write like 5,000 words a day when I'm working on a manuscript.
Wow.
Now, don't get me wrong, the editing process takes vastly longer and is more involved, but I do write very quickly. So I do think that that is something, in terms of taking time and giving yourself permission to do something. I think one thing to really look at is, what are the things that I like to do when there's no pressure? What are things that come easily to me? One of my favorite things that I ever heard, when I think we were doing a conference or something, and one of our guests said, we always have a tendency to really undervalue the things that come easily to us and imagine that they come easily to everyone. And I think everyone has some of those things that feel a little bit easier than they do for the average person, that feel a bit more effortless, that feel fun, or that you're very curious about, things that naturally interest you and that you're naturally a little bit better at. I think you can do things that you're totally doing from zero and are kind of a difficult thing, but it is the natural human, especially adult instinct, to lean out of things that we're not good at because it's embarrassing, quite frankly, and it's a struggle. But I really like your point about, there is a level of permission that we give people who are new parents, for example, of things might be different for them. And I think one of the things that you're kind of identifying is, like, we acknowledge that there's sort of a natural vulnerability and a newness there. And I think one thing that a lot of adults don't give themselves is periods of newness and vulnerability, and saying, I'm learning, I'm trying something new, I'm renewing this aspect of myself, or kind of entering a different chapter of my life. I personally think there's a lot of value in marking that time. Like, I turned 35 this year, and that was like, I wanted to make sure that there were a lot of things that I was doing for myself and giving myself permission to do for 35. And there are a lot of changes I'm making this year. In the summer, I'm actually going to one of my in-laws. She's throwing herself a very fabulous 60s themed 60th birthday party, starting a new chapter of her life, doing a completely new project, quit her job, is on like a really big personal journey.
Wow.
And I follow almost exclusively much older women on social media, and it's always really interesting to see them.
They're so good.
They're so good. And the way that they are just constantly evolving and, allowing themselves to be beginners, because that's what you're describing, right? When you're a new parent, you're a beginner at something.
Yeah.
And I think that is when you combine something that feels naturally enjoyable and passionate for you with kind of saying out loud, if only to yourself, like, this is a new and special time for me, and I'm giving myself permission to enjoy it. I think that creates a very powerful context.
Yeah. We got to give a shout out to the older ladies holding it down on TikTok. I don't know where you're discovering them, but I'm finding them on TikTok. Like the fashion, the style. I'm like, I wish I was this lit. Like, this is so good. They wake up, they're like, I had a coffee today, and then I went for a walk, and then I sat down and I made myself this toast. And it's just like, it's like slow living, but to me in a way that I'm like, oh no, you actually live like this. I feel like the people of our generation who are like slow living, I'm like, I mean, you're over here editing this video. Like, let's be for real, sis.
100%. I'm like, I totally agree. I'm like, I don't need to see a 25-year-old slow living at her Pilates class. No, thank you.
Right.
But also, like, what you're describing is like, they're doing it because they're actually doing it, not because it's like a trend or a hashtag or a style.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting. I'm curious, and you can feel free not to answer this question, but like, do you have a retirement plan? Do you know when you're finished? Like, when are you going to be finished with this entrepreneur CEO world that you're in?
So I definitely don't want to be doing this much longer. No,
but seriously, I think that people think that this stuff is forever, and it's like, no, we all kind of want to be done at some point, guys.
Yeah. So I love a lot of what I do at TFD, and there are parts of it that, I mean, I would always seek out work like that. So I think my goal is eventually to find someone else to take over the more administrative business parts of it, so that I can just work on the things that I like to work on, maybe not even full time. So that's definitely something that I foresee in the near future. But, more medium and long term, I think one thing that's a really big goal of mine is I want to do something for at least a big part of my professional life that's not online. So I worked a lot in hospitality. I'm very passionate about hospitality, and I would really like eventually I have some friends, and I've been approached a few times by companies that do this professionally, but it's just, I need a lot of time to do it. But basically, I'm sure you've seen this where like people will be like, I curate an experience, we go on a trip, it can be all different kinds of things like food-based, creative-based,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. But I'd really like to do something that's very experiential with small groups of people, in part because I think that's something that I could do my whole life. Like some of the older women that I follow, one of my favorites, Elizabeth Mincilli, she's, I think, probably in her 60s. She lives in Italy and she regularly hosts groups on food tours in Italy. And so I think rather than thinking in terms of retirement, it's more thinking in terms of what are things that I can do that will feel good for, the long term and don't kind of keep me on the sort of day-to-day online grind, which I have grown to be tired of.
Yeah, I feel that. I had that same itch, and I started a retreat for CEOs called CEO Spring Break, and it's just 3 days. We did it here in Nashville, and then I moved it to Costa Rica because I love going to Costa Rica.
Ooh.
So we did it in Costa Rica last summer, and we're doing it in Costa Rica again this year. It's literally not next week. By the time this comes out, it'll have happened, or we'll be there potentially, depending on when this episode comes out. And it's 25 people. When I first did it, it was like 100 people. And I was like, this is too much. This feels like work. This is stressful. Like it's too much going on. So then I brought it down to 40, 50 people last year, which felt a little bit better, but it still was like, ooh, this still feels like too much. Like not, I don't do it for money. Like it costs money, but I put it all back into the experience. So this year I'm doing 25 people, and I'm already feel like so much more relief that it's not people emailing me every day. Well, what time am I flying here? What's the itinerary here? It's like I actually can manage these 25 people. I know their names. I know their businesses. I've researched them, so I can be helpful to them throughout this retreat. But I do it because it helps me stay grounded. It's a very selfish thing because it's like joyful for me to help people with their businesses and help them break through whatever walls they're trying to break through. And I think for myself, as I get older and am trying to redefine and rewrite my own journey of what 40s looks like eventually, which is not around the corner, but like, we're going to blink and we're going to be 38. It's going to be very soon, 50s, 60s. And to your point, I definitely want to be spending batches of time doing other things. And it's kind of like batching your life, right? Versus now, it feels very much like my day-to-day is like fixed, right? I got a weekly schedule. I got certain meetings I have every single Monday, every single Tuesday, every single Friday, which is how a company needs to run, or how I run my company, I should say. But at some point, that's got to give. So I think it's a conversation that not enough people have publicly. And it also, I say this, and a lot of my employees listen to this. So if you're listening to this, I love you guys. This is not like me saying, I'm out. It's me saying, like, just like I say to you all in meetings, it's okay to have a life outside of work. It's okay to be a full person. It's okay to shut the computer off at 5 o'clock, get your work done. It's okay to wake up and get your work done so you can get offline at 3 o'clock. Like just practicing what I preach,
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That retreat sounds very fun. I would love to do something like that.
It's a vibe. You can do it. You can do it.
I know.
People would love to spend 3 days with you and just eat yummy food wherever your favorite place is, at your favorite hotel.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, part of it too. So I'm really, really interested. I love like decor and things like that. To be honest, what I'm really exploring doing is buying a property somewhere and turning it into kind of like, I'd love to have a few different iterations of like, it can be a retreat, sometimes paid, sometimes scholarship, sort of like a residency program, have events there. Eventually maybe, who knows, do more of a hotel style vibe. But either way, I definitely think experiential stuff, especially post-pandemic, is something where people, I don't know, I'm just sick of looking at a computer screen.
I know, that's right. It's not good for our health.
It really is. I'm like, this blue light is getting to me.
I feel that. You guys, we are going off track on this episode. I'm going to bring it back, but I think we have the same type of business. So we have similar probably stressors and similar cadences to the ups and downs of a cyclical world, being in media and being in content. So I want to go back to your publishing journey. I mean, you guys have been very successful releasing this amount of books and with this level of frequency and monetizing your audience in a variety of different ways. Can you talk to me about how you have thought about the evolution of your business model for your company? I think more specifically, the diversification of it.
Yeah. So I think there's really like three buckets essentially for a content media business today, at least the way we look at it. So there's monetizing through ad revenue, which we've always done, and we have our sales team and we have most of our, marquee content is branded to some extent or has ads in it. And that's kind of one bucket. And then you have what has increasingly been a big part of what we do, which is kind of membership-based things, direct-to-consumer revenue, whether that's paid events, classes, or, we have a membership program that we've been growing really aggressively, and more and more and more of our stuff is behind that paywall. Mm-hmm. And then third is kind of the, I guess you could say, more sort of PR-based opportunities, which are things like speaking. When we publish books, we've published books as a company once every few years, and, those have all been traditionally published. So, it could be a good chunk of money once, but it's not something we're going to do every year. And I think each of those three definitely has a really important role. But in terms of how we think about it, I mean, for example, we used to publish all of our content on a website. We don't even publish on our website anymore.
I noticed that.
We do all of our text-based content is newsletter. And then we have, most of our marquee content is video or social. Mm-hmm. So, that was a big change that we probably couldn't have foreseen when we started, but it's, people are becoming a little illiterate, honestly, like myself included. It's really hard to read these days. And I remember when I first started working in media back in 2011, I had a list of websites that I would go to like blah, blah, blah.com in the morning and see what was up. I have not done that in years. I just don't do that anymore. So, and one thing that I look back and I regret throughout the years, not regret, but wish I had done differently, is I think in media, often we wait until the writing is really on the wall, like the pivot to video stuff or, moving to membership, sort of structures and things like that. Like, I think we're always a little bit late because it's such a volatile business and there's so much day-to-day churning of content to just feed the algorithm that it can be really hard to step back and see the changes that need to be made on a structural level before they are too late, kind of, or before they've caused problems. And so now I think what we've really been doing is like trying to be more preemptive in the changes that we make structurally. For example, like outside of the one podcast that I do that is ad supported, we have just like preemptively made the decision that all podcast content is paywalled now. And so we're doing like a bunch of smaller podcasts throughout the year that are all gated. Mm-hmm. And we were able to monetize those through ads, but it was like a proactive choice to like, no, let's put it behind the paywall, which again, we're just not really trained to think that way. We're trained to just day-to-day wake up and be like, okay, what are we doing today, rather than take a step back.
Yeah, you just mentioned a couple of things. One of the challenges that I think we are all having as entrepreneurs, when the trends change, when the winds are blowing too hard to the left or to the right, it's a self-identity issue, actually. Like, who are we if people aren't going to the .coms, right? And I talk to my team a lot because we have reporters, we have writers. We don't have as many reporters and writers and journalists as other media companies have. And that was something that a lot of people were like hating on me and hating on Blavity on, like, they're not real journalists. But I came from technology. I'm like, people aren't reading that much. But you can see the average time on a page has gone down significantly. It used to be like people would spend a minute and a half on an article on a page, like really reading something, looking at the pictures, scrolling. It's down to like maybe 45 seconds, like cut in half. That's tough. That's half the ad impressions. That article still costs us the same amount, right? So it becomes prohibitive. And I think too many sites and too many media companies don't diversify. Us having Afrotech as a big event has helped us weather the storm, and having a custom like content business as well, which isn't dependent on our own ad impressions because it's going out, it's being, stuff bought by McDonald's or GM or whomever. What I'm really trying to say is, I think for anyone listening to this, if you are nodding your head, you're like, yeah, my business is dependent on the algorithm, whichever algorithm your business is dependent on. LinkedIn, TikTok definitely is a risky business these days. And Instagram and Facebook, those are the primary ones. Pinterest, oh my gosh, how many people had like crazy Pinterest distribution businesses are like gone. So if your business is dependent on any of those platforms, what Chelsea's really talking about here is owning your audience and then providing value, so much value that they're willing to spend. I think your membership is $9.99 a month.
We have 3 tiers.
Okay.
The major one is $9.99 a month.
Okay, $9.99 a month. So that's not an insane amount, but a good enough amount that someone can say, yeah, I'm getting enough value, and they're going to evaluate it. Especially given you're doing financial literacy, people are going to be constantly evaluating that cost.
Yes.
Right? They're like, I don't know if I need this month. But it's a really huge leap to move into a subscription business. What does your tech stack look like for a subscription business?
So we have a very, very small staff, especially post-pandemic. We have leaned up quite a bit. So essentially our business model has fluctuated enormously in the past 5 years because it used to be, I mean, we used to be making, it was never, I think the majority, but maybe the plurality was through events.
Wow.
Which has really changed.
Totally.
And then, there was a while where we were just like making money hand over fist with digital events. And then people were like, we're sick of those.
Yeah.
So it's been all over the place. But so really our sort of MO has been under hiring in terms, not under hiring, but hiring very minimally and sort of just doing less. Like we reduced a lot of the stuff that we produce. We've eliminated a lot of content. And for example, again, like we don't publish on the website anymore. We don't do a lot of that stuff. So for the memberships, we have one employee who is pretty much solely focused on that, although does focus on some other things. And then most of the rest of the employees who are at least content side touch it in some way, again, because now we've really moved to a model where we have one marquee video a month that is, free, but ad supported. We have our free newsletter and we have social media, but everything other than that is behind the paywall. So pretty much everyone touches it, but only one person is like very centrally focused on it. And we've also found, so for example, with the one video a month, that was a change that I think we made a little, not too late, but I wish we'd made it sooner in the sense that we moved from having a weekly video that was shorter form, which we had since our inception, because that's kind of what we initially started as a production of another company. And that's kind of what they taught us to do. But when I watch YouTube, and I love watching YouTube, I like to watch video essays. I like to watch longer form content. I usually listen to it while I'm doing other things like a podcast. And so we kind of knew that we wanted to move to that format, but we were so dependent on that algorithmic and ad supported model. But then when we switched, we noticed that like the views and engagement skyrocketed. Like these are more than an hour long and they're averaging, I think they average now like 400 to 500,000 views per video, which are very valuable from an ad perspective. But they're also, I mean, we look at everything that we do that's front facing now, that's public, as a funnel. Even like I have a personal TikTok that I build. I don't monetize it in any way because first of all, TikTok is a nightmare to monetize on. So if you're trying to make money off of TikTok, good luck.
No, it's not for us millennials. Let's be for real. It's not for us.
It's not for us, but even from a perspective of like, it is so difficult to be compliant. Their ad rates are terrible. Like
a mess.
It's a nightmare. Like YouTube is 1,000 times better for monetizing.
I agree.
But in general, it's like all of that is just looked at as a funnel, essentially.
Yeah. Right. You're just funneling people into top of funnel for the membership.
100%. And then, the content, and within the membership, that's where we're most diversified: podcast, events, classes, books, things like that.
Right. And you own the audience of the membership, right? Like regardless of the algorithms changing or the ebbs and flows of whatever, like these people have opted in and they're yours.
Yeah, essentially. But again, like I'm sure you can relate to this because I worked in brand partnerships at my last media job before starting TFD. I was a staff writer and then I was the head of branded content. And when you look at the numbers on the surface, like you could get an RFP, in the six figures with some brand, and it's a really shiny object. And it's really hard when you look at memberships that are $10 a month to even get your mind to work in those terms. But then when you start to look at the numbers in aggregate over periods of time, you're like, not only do these numbers add up very quickly at, $10 a month or what have you, it's also, just the difference in revenue types is shocking.
Yeah. In other words, the ebb and flow of an RFP site like business is really challenging because I tell my team every year we start at zero. Okay. Every year we go from zero to whatever revenue target I set out for the company that year. When you have a membership business, every year you don't start at zero. You start at whatever you had on December 31st, right? And that's actually like a level of freedom and stability from an operating overhead perspective and predictability that I think is very freeing. We're working on a membership model for our Afrotech community. We've tested membership for 2190, which is our women's audience, and Travel Noir previously, when I acquired that business, had a membership. There's not easy to scale. I mean, it's not like done, just gate everything and it's done. Like it's actually really, really hard what you've done. So kudos to your team for pulling it off because I've failed twice. So
thank you. It is really, really hard, but it's also, you have to just learn to think in such a different scale. Like we're so used to thinking and on our team, like, oh, this video did X, 100 to 1,000, whatever, like blah, blah, blah. When we're talking about the membership, like in our regular memberships meeting, we're like, oh, this post gained like, let's say 25 members. And it's like, we're so used to being like, that number is ridiculous and insignificant, but you have to learn to think in those numbers because that's the only way to scale it.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I'm receiving this for myself.
It's very, very difficult. But at the end of the day, and that's something that going back to, the more broad entrepreneur questions, like I used to think of my business in terms of, and it's really easy to do so. I like to think in terms of annual revenue. And you're like, oh, 7-figure, like whatever, blah, blah, blah. And there's these benchmarks and whatever. And it's really hard to remember that outside of a few types of revenue, all of that is like completely theoretical.
Yeah.
You could do 50% of it, you could do 20% of it, you could do 0% of it next year. None of it is
guaranteed
at all something you can rely on in this business, except for that type of direct to consumer recurring revenue. And that is something that has given me a level of peace. It's just knowing that there is a part of our P&L now every year that is like, that's coming back next year.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I aspire, and Chelsea, maybe in 6 months, I'll be like, okay, I got it. We got it. You guys are watching me build in person live in color. So you guys will all know if I figured it out or not. Shout out to our membership team on the Alphatech side. Well, Chelsea, I could keep going on and on and on, but I would love for you to share with our audience how people can connect with you personally and also your company. And then any final tips for an entrepreneur who's thinking about redefining their own relationship and identity with their company and with themselves and giving themselves a little bit more permission.
So I'm Chelsea Fagan. I primarily use Instagram and TikTok. Both are Fagan Chelsea. My business is The Financial Diet, just The Financial Diet on pretty much all platforms. And, my advice to entrepreneurs trying to redefine their relationship to their work is just to remember that at the end of the day, if you are not enjoying it, if it's not about, doing something that you feel passionately about and giving you a better work life than you would have as an employee of a company, the whole title of entrepreneur means nothing. And it should not at all be about the title. It should be about what you're able to do with it.
Can I get an amen?
Woo!
All right, Chelsea, thank you so much for joining the journey. And y'all, I'll see you next episode. If you haven't already, I actually have an entire program on hobbies. So if you're looking for something to do, if you're looking for what hobby might fit your persona, go to morgandebon.com and click the hobbies quiz so that you can discover what hobby persona is right for you so that you can work on decoupling your identity from your business. Till next time, see you later. Thanks for listening to the Journey Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review and head to our Instagram and YouTube to leave a comment. I look forward to hearing how this podcast has made an impact on your own journey.